Tonight, the leader in the Senate says the Russia investigation is over, urging lawmakers to move forward even as House Democrats close in on holding the Attorney General in contempt of Congress over the Mueller report. The White House gears up for trade talks with China, what new tariffs could mean for the average American, and the push for a growing number of states to pass pro-life measures, all with the end goal of going to the Supreme Court. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Weeks after the Russia investigation ended, lawmakers are still split on what to do with the Mueller report. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. That split on full display today, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell declaring it's time to move on, and Democrats like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying not so fast.
Abigail Robertson is on Capitol Hill with more. Abby, McConnell seemed pretty emphatic it's time to move on from the Mueller report.
That's right, John. He sent a pretty strong message today. That is, case closed. That's what McConnell has to say about Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election.
For 2 years, many of the president's opponents seemed to be hoping the worst conspiracy theories were actually true. They seemed to be hoping for a national crisis.
But Democrats call this latest move a Republican whitewash of Mueller's findings.
So our leader says, let's move on. It's sort of like Richard Nixon saying, let's move on at the height of the investigation of his wrongdoing.
Despite the majority leader's proclamation, we've hardly heard the last of the report or its author, at least on the House side of the Hill.
A tentative date has been set of May 15th, and we hope the special counsel will appear.
Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham says it's not likely Mueller makes it to his committee.
I don't envision one unless he believes that Attorney General Barr misrepresented that phone conversation.
And reiterated,
it's over.
President Trump tweeted over the weekend that Mueller should not testify, although some House Republicans want their chance to question him.
I would like to see all of Robert Mueller's investigation laid out there, because there are some very serious questions about his conduct in that position.
And dig into how the whole investigation got started.
I'd like to know why he showed so little interest in how the greatest lie in the history of American presidential politics entered the public discussion, was used by high-level officials in the Obama administration.
Democrats on the House Judiciary plan to vote Wednesday to hold Attorney General Barr in contempt for not releasing an unredacted version of the Mueller report.
Compliance with congressional subpoenas is not optional.
While Republicans argue the attacks on Barr are unacceptable.
Some of the things they've said about the Attorney General, they've accused him of everything but abandoning his children to wolves.
Now, believe it or not, there is one part of the Mueller report that gets buy-in from both sides, and that is that the threat of Russian interference in our next election is still very real, and Congress needs to do something about that.
Abigail, former White House counsel Don McGahn is also refusing to hand over documents related to the Russia investigation to the House committee. Can you explain why he won't hand them over?
Now, even though McGahn is former White House counsel, the administration instructed him not to comply with the House Democrat subpoena and hand over these documents. I think the deadline for him to do that was today, and McGahn listened to that. And McGahn's counsel is arguing that the White House and Congress need to reach an agreement as to whether or not he has to comply with this subpoena. But until that happens, McGahn is going to hold on to those documents. And the White House's view is that even though McGahn already disclosed these documents with Mueller during his investigation, they still are subject to executive privilege. So if House Democrats want them, they need to go through the White House. And part of that subpoena that House Democrats sent to McGahn also called for him to testify before Congress. That's tentatively set for May 21st. We might still see that happen. McGahn hasn't said yet what his decision is on that. And remember that he proved to be one of Mueller's key witnesses in the investigation. So that is why House Democrats want to hear from him directly.
All right, Abigail Robertson for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you. Well, FBI Director Chris Wray says he doesn't think the Trump campaign was spied on before the 2016 election.
Do you believe that they're engaging in spying when they're following FBI investigative policies and procedures?
Well, that's not.
And testifying before a Senate panel today, Wray broke from comments Attorney General Bill Barr made last month when Barr told the same panel that he believed spying did occur.
Well, President Trump's tough talk on trade with China is affecting the markets. At the closing bell today, the Dow was down more than 470 points. The drop comes as China's vice premier is scheduled to arrive here in Washington to discuss ways to end the trade war. CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us with details. Ben?
John, President Trump maintains the two countries were close to making a major trade deal. That is, until China backtracked on certain negotiated commitments. That's why President Trump is threatening new tariffs on the Chinese by the end of the week. A sudden increase in tension as China's economic czar heads to D.C. for another round of trade talks. Wall Street continues to feel the effects from Monday after President Trump tweeted that he would, by Friday, raise import taxes from 10% to 25% on $200 billion of Chinese imports. It's a threat the commander-in-chief has made before, this time signaling frustration with negotiations that the trade deal with China continues, but too slowly. A different story from last week when Trump sounded optimistic.
The deal itself is going along pretty well. I would even say very well. We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But we're getting close to a very historic, monumental deal, and if it doesn't happen, we'll be fine too, maybe even better.
The tariff hike is in a fight over Beijing's technology ambitions. The U.S. has accused them of predatory tactics, including cyber theft. Senator Chuck Schumer tweeted, "Hang tough on China, President Trump. Don't back down." Trump and Chinese President Xi had agreed to hit the pause on the trade war as the two sides work towards a long-term agreement. Now, Wednesday's visit comes after Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and U.S. Trade Rep Robert Lighthizer just got back from Beijing for similar trade talks. John?
Friday is the latest deadline for the new tariffs. If they go through, what impact would that have?
Well, John, it could impact everything we buy from China, things like T-shirts, shoes, and even suits. I spoke to Riley Walters, a policy analyst from the Heritage Foundation, who said farmers would also be caught in the crosshairs. Take a listen.
But electronics, other types of sort of home furnitures, you name it. I mean, it's hard to find something that we don't buy from China that won't be impacted by these tariffs.
And Riley, you did mention farmers. They're going to take the biggest hit of all if the tariffs do go into effect.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this has been one of the concerns for the past year. It's that American farmers have been feeling a lot of the brunt, or sort of the negative effects of these retaliatory tariffs. Soybean exports to China have just plummeted over the past couple of years.
Again, trade talks continue. Wednesday could actually avert the tariffs. John?
And Ben, last question here. As we reported a moment ago, this is having a big impact on the stock market, both abroad and here at home.
John, it really is. The markets took a hit here and in China. Walters says the markets tend to have an immediate response. So good news, they go up. Bad news, they go down, which is what happened in this case.
There will be certain shocks here or there, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the overall state of our economies. And so I think it's important to remember that the state of the U.S. economy right now is particularly good, but the state of the Chinese economy is not too bad either.
And he does bring up a good point. Here in the U.S., the GDP surpassed forecasts in the first quarter, rising 3.2%. Unemployment reached its lowest number since, get this, 1969. And you bet the president plans to use this in the 2020 election. John, Jenna?
Thanks, Ben.
All right, well, joining us now is Julia Manchester with The Hill. Julia, good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
You know, this trade war, how is it playing out in Middle America?
You know, what's so interesting about this is that we're seeing this really impact consumers across the board throughout the United States. But in Middle America, it's really impacting a lot of farmers or those in the Rust Belt. And we have to remember, these counties that it's really impacting, like I said, in rural America, in the Rust Belt, those are counties that went for Donald Trump in 2016. So going into 2020, you know, I think the president is in a very difficult place because he's trying to keep this campaign promise of getting tough on China. But at the same time, if he goes too far, this could hurt his previous voters and potentially push them to the Democratic side.
So any indication of where this is headed? Will the Chinese make concessions and enable President Trump to declare a victory? Or is this something that potentially, as you just mentioned with 2020, the Democrats will use in their campaign against him?
I think Democrats will absolutely use this in their campaign against him. You know, in 2016, we saw party realignment, if you will, on the issue of trade. Remember, it was Barack Obama who was trying to push his own Democrats on Capitol Hill to support more free trade, more globalization. But Trump completely flipped that, and now Republicans seem to be that party of more protectionism. So you're going to see Democrats, you know, try to bring home that message that Barack Obama, someone who's very popular within the Democratic Party, originally pushed. But I think you're also going to see China, you know, stick to their word on this. I don't think China wants to give up too many concessions as well, because China is now a leading global player in the economy. So, you know, both sides really dug in at this point.
Yeah, on the topic of the Russia investigation, Julia, what do you make of FBI Director Chris Wray saying that spying didn't occur? He wouldn't use that phrase, going against his boss, Bill Barr.
Yeah, that was I think this entire saga between Bill Barr's comments just a couple of weeks ago saying spying did occur and Christopher Wray kind of defending it. You know, it's all very surprising how this has played out. However, I'm not surprised that Chris Wray said that in the first place. I think in the FBI's point of view, any surveillance that did occur was for national security purposes, and it wasn't necessarily on the Trump campaign, but rather on Russians looking to meddle in their election. And there has been a consensus among the intelligence community that, yes, Russia did try to interfere in the election. So I'm not surprised by Chris Wray's response. However, I would like to see how this plays going forward, because you're seeing Republicans in the minority trying to push this narrative that there was spying against the Trump campaign in 2016. So they're going to look to the bottom of this, because Republicans, led by President Trump, have pushed this idea that the intelligence community is biased against Trump or anyone who's Team Trump or maybe Republican.
House Democrats and Senate Republicans are on complete polar opposite ends right now as far as Mueller, as far as impeachment and investigations. How is this all going to resolve?
You know, I don't see it really resolving in the near future. I think both sides are just unfortunately so dug in at this point, and it's so politicized ahead of the election. You know, you're seeing leadership such as Nancy Pelosi in the House trying to, you know, maybe goad her progressive members and not going towards impeachment and essentially say we need to own the center. You know, she said today that President Trump has led the Republicans so far away from the center that we need to fill that gap. However, we're still seeing Democrats continue to really appeal to that liberal base and try to push as many investigations into Trump as possible. On the Republican side, they're really on the defensive on this, but at the same time, like we said before with the investigation into whether they were spying on the Trump campaign, they're looking into that as well. But, you know, I think voters going into 2020, I don't think your average voter necessarily cares about these issues that are playing out on Capitol Hill. They're going to care about the economy or health care. So I think it's important for Republicans and Democrats to keep that in mind going forward if they want to be successful.
Man, it's telling what the 2020 Democrats are talking about on the campaign trail. It's not this Russia investigation stuff. Julia, former White House counsel Don McGahn, the House Democrats, they want to call him to testify. Could he be subpoenaed? He said he won't go, but could they subpoena him?
They could subpoena him, and we're actually seeing that the subpoena has been, I think, the tool that House Democrats have been using to get people to come to Capitol Hill. However, the issue is, you know, you're seeing the Trump administration telling officials and former officials not to come to Capitol Hill in wake of all of these subpoenas, and that you're going to see the Trump administration really continue to fight these subpoenas, and that could actually work out for the Trump administration in the long term, because the longer these legal battles draw out, you know, the more fatigued Americans and even members on Capitol Capitol Hill are going to be. So, you know, Democrats could subpoena him, but it doesn't necessarily mean he'll show up.
How do they expect to get really anything done with all of this gridlock and going back and forth, Julia, legislatively?
You know, you're seeing last week it seemed to be the revival of Infrastructure Week or whatever. So that seems to be one point of bipartisanship. You're also seeing the drug opioid crisis in Middle America and across the country being a point of bipartisanship. However, I would say that on most of these issues, and especially in the light of the Mueller report, that's going to be unresolved.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Julia Manchester, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, we sit down with the father of an 11-year-old killed in the Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. Hear how he plans to honor the memory of his son. Welcome back. The people behind the deadly Easter bombings in Sri Lanka have all been arrested or killed. That's according to the country's acting police chief. 7 suicide bombers died when they detonated their devices at churches and hotels. 257 people were killed in those attacks, and more than 70 suspects have been arrested in the investigation.
Well, while those arrests are good news, nothing can, of course, fill the void for families who lost loved ones. And that includes Alexander Arrow, who lost his only child on Easter Sunday.
CBN's Eric Phillips sat down with him just 2 days after the funeral of his only child and joins us now. I can't imagine just how heartbreaking that must have been for him.
I can't imagine either. As a father, your heart has to go out to somebody who goes through something like this. And when I reached out to Alex Arrow, he agreed to talk to us for one reason, and really one reason only. It's because he wants the world to know about Kieran and how great he was.
It was the most difficult thing that I think a father can possibly do. And that was compounded by the fact that Kieran was the most amazing person that I've had the privilege to know.
By all accounts, the 11-and-a-half-year-old not only enjoyed life, but was also very advanced for his age, especially in math and science.
The things that an 11-and-a-half-year-old talks about are not usually these big grandiose goals, but you know, his career ambition was to be a PhD neuroscientist, and that was because he figured out that that's how he could apply his talents to help other people in the most significant way.
Kieran attended Sidwell Friends, an exclusive private school in Washington, D.C., but he was studying abroad in Sri Lanka, staying with his mother and maternal grandparents.
About a year and a half ago, she thought that would be a good experience for him to spend a semester abroad, and I had to agree. I mean, it's an incredible cultural experience for a 10-year-old.
It worked out so well that he stayed an additional 2 semesters. On Easter Sunday, he and his family were having breakfast at the Cinnamon Grand Hotel when a suicide bomber attacked. While his mother and grandmother survived their injuries, Kieran did not. A piece of shrapnel piercing his heart. His father got the tragic call in the middle of the night. Alexander had seen his boy just weeks before when Kieran visited him in San Diego for spring break.
Last time I hugged him goodbye was when he went back to the airport to go back with his mom to Sri Lanka. I keep hearing his voice around every corner, keep expecting him to say, "Hi, Dad," and go on with one of his great questions. I still have that feeling that it's all a bad dream.
Alexander told us it's important for as many people as possible to know just how much was sacrificed in this senseless violence.
He's articulate, he's funny, his sense of humor, his altruism, his ingenuity, his love for others.
And he wants his son's dream of using his talents to help others to count for something.
I have wonderful memories, but I have a hole where all of the future memories were going to be. His teenage years that he won't have, his adult years that he won't have, his family that he won't have.
You know, and during our conversation, I told Alexander Arrow that he seemed amazingly calm, you know, and really composed about this whole deal, more so than I would ever be under these circumstances. And he assured me that he is really falling apart on the inside. Yeah. And I can also add that he told me to remind everyone to treasure their kids and their loved ones and to do it all in memory of Kieran.
Yeah, great
Touching
advice.
story.
Great story.
Yep,
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Coming up, hear the strategy behind why some states are passing strict abortion laws.
Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp signed the state's heartbeat bill into law today. It outlaws abortion in the state after a heartbeat is detected as early as 6 weeks into a pregnancy. Other states have passed similar measures. Pro-life advocates hope legal challenges to those bills could ultimately go to the Supreme Court and overturn Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision which legalized abortion nationwide.
Well, more states are passing laws involving abortion than ever before. Some severely restrict the procedure, while others seek to make it legal right up to birth.
As Paul Strand reports, many of these new laws are being passed to create court cases that could be taken all the way to the High Court.
There's a strange dichotomy going on. Some states, like Indiana, passing more and more measures to limit abortions.
From 1983 to 2010, states were only passing an average of 15 pro-life laws. Since 2010, that number's gone up to 57.
While other states are building a high wall around it to protect abortion. Mike Fichter, the head of Indiana's Right to Life, explains what's going on.
At this point, with Justice Kavanaugh now sitting on the court, any abortion-related bill that percolates up before the full court could be a vehicle to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Indiana lawmakers don't like to see their bills judged as unconstitutional, but if that means a Supreme Court hearing, it could be worth it.
We do think that a lot of these protected pro-life laws will receive a more sympathetic hearing with today's court than they received previously.
Kenneth Falk heads up the ACLU of Indiana.
Clearly, there's a legislative strategy to push as many challenges to Roe and as many abortions restrictions as possible.
Catholic University's Michael New says the percentage of Americans turning pro-life has gone up both in opinion and practice.
Since 1980, the U.S. abortion rates declined by 50%. That's a pretty substantial gain in a relatively short amount of time.
That could affect the Supreme Court justices.
Public opinion does have some impact on the way they rule. You know, they don't want to consistently reach unpopular decisions that, nobody likes because they would lose legitimacy. So public opinion is something that I think many judges do consider. And I think that does bode well for the pro-life movement.
Both sides of the abortion debate are realizing Roe v. Wade is going to topple. Sooner or later, it's going to topple.
Some states seem in a panic that the Supreme Court might rule any abortions illegal.
You have states like New York that are trying to get ahead of the curve to say, we don't care what happens with Roe v. Wade. We're going to keep abortion fully legal in this state.
The Democratic Party has moved pretty aggressively to the left on these sanctity of life issues.
And on the other side,
we see really a surge in activism, especially in conservative states.
It's all just building into this huge crescendo that's bringing this issue front and center.
Constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis points out Roe and the related case Planned Parenthood versus Casey didn't actually grant a right to abortion, but a right to make one's own health care choices.
And that right to privacy covers some abortions in some circumstances.
These new contested state laws deal with all sorts of different issues surrounding abortions. Can a baby be killed after its heartbeat can be detected?
We've seen 3 states pass these heartbeat bills that would protect unborn children after fetal heartbeats detected.
Other bills deal with when can the unborn feel pain? Is an embryo a person with the right to life that any other human enjoys? Can a baby be aborted simply because of its gender, race, or disability?
Questions that deal with what types and circumstances of pregnancies can a woman choose to get an abortion.
The ACLU's Falk says for pro-choice advocates, the court approving any restriction is a clear threat.
If you allow the state to say, no, we have an important reason to stop an abortion, then states can always articulate what they deem to be important reasons. It certainly is a threat to the existing rights to abortion that exist in America today.
About a third of the states are fighting to restrict the practice in various stages, while another group is against any restrictions, even for babies who survive an attempted abortion.
I think it's exposing how serious there is a rift in the culture on this issue. We even have to debate, should we give medical treatment to a baby fully born alive? And to see the United States Senate unable to even advance that legislation is really shocking.
At the extreme, some state legislatures have already passed laws that would immediately ban abortions if the court reverses Roe v. Wade, while several others are doing the exact opposite.
This huge groundswell is happening across the nation right now. I believe the Supreme Court is seeing this. They're realizing they've got to deal with this issue.
So could it be the day is nigh that pro-choice types have feared and pro-life forces have hoped and prayed for, a crescendo to the national battle over abortion? Maybe. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Indianapolis.
Thanks, Paul. And that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.